Okay. Just organize that. Great. Hello and welcome to an overview discussion of user experience, otherwise known as UX. There's a lot to cover, so I might go a little fast and a little light on some topics, but we've scheduled a few breaks for questions in between sections in case you want to go further in depth, or you can just review some of the information on your own, anything like that. So let's get started. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Melissa, and I am a UX designer living in New Orleans. I work for OneTech, which is an AI solutions company in my previous home of Dallas, Texas. And I'm also a grad student studying human-centered design and engineering at the University of Washington in Seattle. I like to keep busy during quarantine. So I've been working for the past 5 years in UX and product design, but before that, I worked as a freelance artist, a web designer, product designer, event organizer, and just generally any job that was thrown at me when I lived in New York. UX design to me was a path that consolidated this really wide range of interests and fused them together in a way that lets me consider design, strategy, community, and empathy at the heart of my career. So in this discussion, I want to talk about what UX is, how it applies to the work you may already be doing, and why you should pursue it further to benefit the projects you work on, whether you want to transition to UX or add to your skill set. So let's begin with what is user experience. I like to define it as understanding the behaviors, patterns, habits, desires, and mental models of a product's users. The idea is that we are not trying to define the experience for the user, but gather information to understand why and how we design a product or feature. It might help a bit to go into the history of UX. It's a relatively recent term with a few arguments on who is the first, whether it's the phrase user's experience, first used by Brenda K. Laurel in 1986, or the oft-cited 1995 CHI paper by Apple's Don Norman that coined user experience as a term. Ultimately, as a practice, it's rooted in human-computer interaction, which was developed as a mix of engineering, ergonomic, and cognitive sciences way before us designers got involved. So don't think of it as just the realm for design, but as a full practice for business. When we think about how those practices applied, they were developed for aviation controls, manufacturing, all the early interfaces. As computers and applications were developed and came to be more complex, we needed to begin software development processes using iterative prototyping. And we have been doing this for decades now. UX design was built on all of these previous HCI waves and practices to the rapid prototyping, user research, and iterative design format we currently see. So when we think of the user experience, where does this apply? Looking at your technology from the user's point of view, we start to see all the touch points of their experience with your product, as you can see here in this wonderful diagram that I borrowed from the internet. So this can be navigating the site's information architecture or the visual interface design like colors, buttons, images, or the copywriting that they're reading as they build a rapport with your company. It can include animations and motion design, accessibility considerations for the UI, and the organization of your semantic HTML, focus states, and more. So we can see that there are a lot of touch points where UX isn't just in the realm of the designer product team, but can, and I think should, be holistically considered by the organization at large. So let's jump into some examples of good and bad experiences to help visualize it. Let's define our first example. This is something a lot of people have encountered either personally or professionally, especially if you're like me and work in enterprise software, and that's really, really long, complicated forms. They can be at best tedious to fill out, resulting in customer drop-off if you have marketing and sales concerns, and at worst, filled out incorrectly, resulting in negative impacts for the user, like say if this was a medical or IRS form. Without organization to the content, clear understanding of what information is required, easy to understand messaging, and more, your users can get into a lot of trouble. UX can also, our next example is that UX can also apply to physical products as well, like this adorable cat fox looking mug. It looks great, but when you put it to use, you might end up with some lawsuits. And most seriously, you may remember the 2018 Hawaii false missile alert, where due to user error, a message was sent across multiple communication systems in Hawaii that a ballistic was approaching and to take shelter. It's a popular review to study because it's not just UI design issues of merely improving this list to identify and organize the different templates, which you can see here. This was what they chose, and this was what they had intended to choose. But when you think about it as a whole, the system requirements that should have been in place to confirm the action, messaging to confirm that they're about to contact people live and more, these are all things that is not just about the user interface, but how that user, would have gone about making these decisions and enacting those actions. So in summary, it's not just ergonomics or making it look good, but also taking into account what the user is trying to accomplish and designing to best help them achieve their goals and avoid catastrophic mistakes. So now when we talk about good user experiences, we UX designers tend to talk about tapping off all the boxes of a group of heuristics. So here in this slide, I'm referencing Peter Morville's user experience honeycomb. A good experience is one that is useful, usable, desirable, valuable, accessible, credible, and findable to the user. So when we talk about good experiences, we aim for quick, seamless interactions with your product. So let's check out an example. As I was thinking about what to use as an example for y'all, I landed on this site, herbivorebeauty.com, that allows users to customize their experiences based on their accessibility needs. Now, anyone can use the site and make use the site and make their purchases rather than designing for what some might consider their base users, which would be able-bodied users who don't have issues with font sizes or spacing or contrast, etc. If you go and check out the site itself is already beautiful. It's easy to read and navigate, but this added functionality to customize your experience makes it something that just checks all those boxes for me when it comes to great UX design. It's intended to improve the digital shopping experience and is not something that people might dread having to access in their day-to-day life. We find these good experiences by not just thinking like the user, but also doing research with our potential or existing users. And I really do highly recommend checking out the site and playing around with it. So this was a lot to just drop into. So are there any questions at the moment about the user experience and what we've covered so far? We'll be getting deeper into the process of designing for the user experience in the next few slides.
Feel free to either unmute or ask your question within the chat if you have any.
Sorry. Where did you go? Sorry, my screen got messed up because I hit the wrong buttons. There it is. Okay. That'll go better. Okay, can everyone see my screen again? Thank you. All right, let's move on then to the next part. So as we covered, UX design is about understanding the user's experiences and then testing our designs to see if they meet expectations. We begin this through user research, talking to, surveying, studying real live human beings in the discovery phase. This is important because though you can read up on the years of science and human cognition, review any number of articles published on an accessible application like Medium or through published papers in academia about how people react to certain interface patterns, ultimately, if you avoid talking to people before you implement your ideas, once you put that product in front of an actual user, you will find that they will break away from at least a few behavior expectations, if not most of them. And then you're gonna, either be behind schedule as you roll back to fix issues, or you're stuck launching a product that no one wants or maybe even understands how to use. Which also brings me to why I labeled this slide how it should go. But here is how it'll probably go. This emphasizes that in the design phase, you should be testing your ideas, and they won't always be perfect. And sometimes it's as easy as just going back to redesign a flow, which, very lucky if that's all that it is. But sometimes the user testing will challenge your initial research, and at that point, you should pause, regroup, and understand why your data was so far off before moving forward. A thing that I picked up in my time as an illustrator is that if your foundational sketch of, say, like a hand is wrong, no matter how expertly you render it, that thumb might just always be on the wrong side. So don't be afraid to go back, do the work, and and make sure that you understand what the issues are, so that way you can design for that. Let's dig into the process. So one of the things that drew me towards UX design as a practice over what I was doing previously was its use of data as a tool for designing. We get this through a wide number of ways. So as a design practitioner, you can run through heuristics and cognitive walkthroughs. If you haven't heard of design heuristics previously, the most common one is the Nielsen-Norman heuristics, which are a set of guidelines that allow you to go through a site to self-analyze issues with the site's usability. I listed a few other principles that you could follow as well to get an idea of the various ideas each group has, because everyone has kind of different ideas of what makes a user interface functional, usable, etc. When we talk about a heuristic evaluation, we're usually looking for items like user control and feedback, error prevention, help in documentation, and more. So you would run through the site and see what happens, when you hit error messages and stuff like that. And that can help build that idea of what's wrong before you talk to people, and then you can keep moving forward. A cognitive walkthrough is a usability testing method where, again, as the UX practitioner, before you even have to go and talk to the users, you go through a series of tasks to identify how usable a product is. This is helpful with an existing product where you're working to understand what was created and where potential pain points are before you talk to your user. After that is, of course, when you want to go and run it through with users, so that way you have hard data that isn't just your opinion of why this doesn't work. With an existing product, we generally already do some form of tracking of our users. So this is where we get into the quantitative data. We can analyze where they navigate, how long they stay on the page. With advanced tools, we can see hotspots for tracking where their attention is on the page, see what links and photos might grab more attention. So you can leverage that as you think about your redesign and what areas have problems and which are more successful. Conducting surveys and interviews also help with discovery if you're trying to understand a wide range of users. It can be small, where you interview stakeholders and employees in a company, if you're like me, building internal products, for a small group of users. You can also conduct interviews with potential users. Earlier this year, I was working on a team to understand the needs of people with hearing loss. We sent out a survey through our networks to get some answers to initial questions about the experience and screen potential users who we then reached out to for interviews. We conducted 25 qualitative interviews to get to know the intricacies of their experience and see where we can help, not just in designing the hearing aid itself, but in the community that we're building around the product. So once you've collected your data, you might opt to create personas. Personas are a bit of a hot topic in the UX field. Some feel that they're helpful for visualizing your major user groups based on the information you've learned. Some, however, find them distracting or the summary misleading as people cling too firm to them as kind of a source of universal truth. I'm someone who falls in the middle. I think that they are a useful way to refer to the data collected, and they help me decenter myself. So now I can think about designing software for someone else instead of to my preferences and assumptions of how this should work. However, I've also been able to work without personas successfully for other projects. So don't feel like you have to do this. It's just another tool to help you organize your data and your thoughts as you go along this design process. On screen is an example of a persona that I created for a personal project where we wanted to redesign the parking meter. After our interviews of getting to know people who've used parking meters before, we created two main group personas. The one on screen is the busy parent with 4 children who owns a vehicle and needs a fast experience and is familiar with the ins and outs of the city she resides in. Our other persona, which isn't on screen right now, is a part-time driver who is more likely to rent zip cars on occasion and come into the city. So they wouldn't understand parking rules and they would have concerns about, getting tickets, etc. Continuing a little bit with my parking meter example, once we understood the pain points of our users, whether a process being too slow, confusing, or just frustrating to navigate, we moved into our initial designs and built prototypes. Prototyping is my very favorite part because it's getting to put your ideas into action and testing to see their successes and failures. Here was that next step in that parking meter project. We opted to go with a big mall kiosk style touchscreen for street parking instead of the tiny little digital screens that we've encountered. We initially created low fidelity wireframes, which was a simple version to help get an idea of what buttons users expected to see on screen, plot out that workflow, entering your license plate, paying for your time, etc. And we also created a cardboard version of the kiosk to understand the height of the screen, the location of the controls, and make sure that it was comfortable for use. These are all different ways that you can prototype, whether it's a digital or a physical object. With all these various prototypes, we ran user tests to build up to our final high fidelity wireframe, where we then ran further user tests until we were satisfied with the product. So to dive into the testing side of things a little bit deeper, and also stepping for a second away from that parking meter, there are a number of ways to conduct this, and your methods would be based on your specific project. You can run a usability test on any level of prototype, whether it's as simple as the paper prototype, a black and white digital wireframe, a full color click-through prototype like you would see with Sketch, Figma, or Adobe XD, or one that you even coded up yourself. Ideally, you would want to conduct a usability test with someone who has not seen the designs before and have them run through set tasks. When analyzing the tasks, you want to study not just quantitative metrics like whether the task was successful here, the time to complete, etc., but you also need to pay attention to their body language, confusion, frustration when running through the tasks. This is because your tester may be too polite to admit they had issues, either to make themselves seem more competent or to avoid hurting your feelings by telling you that you made an awful product. So when you watch them, and this can be either in person or remotely on camera through Zoom, as I've been doing for the past 6 months or so, it's important to understand, to see their body language, and it'll help you further your understanding of their evaluation. The photo here is an example of a note-taking template my team created to run a usability study on a platform for medical practitioners. So we ran them through the task. We timed them from start to finish and recorded how long it took them to complete it, covering whether or not they had actually completed the task, which is something that came up in a few areas where they thought they had completed a task but actually did not. Number of restarts, assists, and again, observing the behavior and emotion. We were a team of 3 people. So one was our moderator who ran them through the tasks and would help them if they had any troubles. One was responsible just as an observer. And then the other one was writing down notes for all the comments as they thought aloud and went through it. So, if they ran into the screen, they'd be like, okay, I'm going to click this button and this button and this button. It's a little bit tedious, but you get so much information doing things this way. Oh, actually, at this point, I'd like to take a breather and see if we, again, have any more questions about what's been discussed up to this point before we dig into a few other topics outside of this design process.
Yeah, we actually do have a question from Zoom user. What is an effective research before moving on to the design stage? And how do we determine that?
So there's several ways to do it, and it's really going to be specific to the project because if it's a brand new product, like with the hearing aid project that I had mentioned, we did competitive analysis as well as doing those interviews. We kind of chose the number 25 just to get like a good core amount, and people have different ideas of what is the correct number of people to interview or not. But usually, as you're gathering all this data, you'll start to eventually see patterns and you're not learning anything more. And that's around the time that the research should stop. Other times it could just be that like you need to get this done in a few weeks. So you only have a few days to go and work with the data that you can collect in that time. That's pretty much how it goes.
I have a question.
Yeah.
It's okay. So I'm currently taking a UX design course, and they've gone through a number of frameworks. And there's always like a brief description of each one. So we have like user-centered design. They have the 5 elements framework. They have the design thinking framework, and all of them, if I had to like just give a brief summary, they all seem to lay out research before you design, make sure that you're actually interacting with users, come up with a design or prototype, test it. So they all seem like they're doing the same thing, just at different rates or different stages. So I'm just wondering like how much emphasis or how much time should be spent on like remembering the different frameworks, or is that just something like it's just in your toolbox for like whichever project you're working on?
Yeah, that's generally how I do it. That's like learning a really good foundation, and it's something that is really helpful, especially for like gathering your thoughts and figuring out like what your path is going to be. A lot of the times someone will just come to you and be like, we need you to fix this part of this application. And so, you're like, okay, well now what do I do? And referring back to those frameworks can help of like, this is a quick project, so let's do it in this manner, or let's do it in a different one if it's a bigger project. So they're all really helpful to know. But depending on the company, they're not going to say like, we're going to use this specific framework. You'll usually just be like, this is just built into our process. Great. Let's continue on then. So a topic that I think tends to be overlooked when people start out building products is accessibility. When we design for users, we tend to focus, as I've mentioned, on more able-bodied users because we think of them as the majority of our users rather than inclusively thinking about all of our users and their needs. Accessibility means that products that are universally designed to be usable by people with a wide variety of characteristics, including different types of disabilities. They are compatible with assistive technologies, screen readers being the most commonly known. But as you design to accessibility standards, some of which are mentioned here, this should minimize the need for some assistive technologies by taking into account color, contrast, motion design, and its negative effects, focus states, and more. So avoid brushing this off as edge cases or something to fit in later. If you design without them, you're already building something that is technically unusable. And as we discussed, your foundations play a large part in the product, in how your product can be scaled out. When thinking about accessibility, it also opens our eyes to the impact of our creations. When, say, I design a piece of enterprise software intended to be used internally by a company, the stakeholders might say, we don't have any accessibility concerns. None of our employees have these issues. But this also means that anyone with a disability who encounters that software in the future isn't going to be able to do their job. And so we are participating in the exclusion of our users with the applications we built when we disregard accessibility in the beginning stages. As we further consider the impacts we have in the technology we create, dark patterns is a term that comes up a lot as another focus for UX designers. We think about our users as people who think in certain ways, react in certain ways, and we try to quantify all of this. And that also means that we begin to understand how to manipulate them in certain ways. Dark patterns embodies this, whether it's making it so difficult to cancel a subscription that people just tend to give up and keep racking up microcharges, or hiding advertisements as legitimate content, or even, tricking you into putting something into your shopping cart. Or it could just be something as simple as having a user click through a number of screens in one way and then switching the buttons around for the final screen. So that way they don't actually cancel or take an action that you don't want them to do. If you're someone who's focused on building up trust in a company, and that's one of the things that I feel is my responsibility as a UX designer for my company. So this is a good way to erode that. Talking to stakeholders about why not to implement these and better ways to achieve their goals can be really daunting, but it helps us all create better products and experiences. So on screen here, I'm going to run through the screens they have to go through in order to cancel an Audible subscription. So here, all of the active buttons that they want you to click are bright and orange, even though I'd already clicked a button that said, I want to cancel. Going through the next one, I now have to tell them why I'm canceling, even though I just want to cancel. And then here, they're again trying to go and pull me in of like, look at all these other fun buttons to go and press. And here's other ways that you can just keep your membership. Please keep giving us your money. Eventually I got to here. And once I finally clicked that button, my subscription was over. So it feels, fairly innocuous. It's like, of course we want you to keep maintaining your subscription, but its intention is to confuse and frustrate users to avoid losing their business. So for someone like me, that makes me even more determined to go and cancel my subscription. No. So recognizing when these are being implemented is important. And this really only scratches the surface of ethics in user experience. So at that note, does anyone have any questions?
It's funny that you mentioned that because I just experienced that trying to cancel my Napster subscription. And just with the fury, I was like, I will find out how to get rid of it.
Yeah, and then you'll never want to sign up for them again because that was a terrible experience to have.
If you're interested though in trying to keep the customer, is there a more subtle way to, I guess, not constantly bombard them for the finish line, but do you think is there a way to kind of try to draw them back in?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if I had just hit that cancel the first cancel subscription button, that one that brought us into this workflow, and then they just showed this screen, I would have been happy. In fact, I would have considered I should just go and pause my membership. But that wasn't what happened.
Right.
So question then, why do you think a company, so if this is Audible and I experienced that with, it was Napster. Those are larger companies. Why, I guess, is that common for larger companies to start using, I guess, UX for these purposes then?
Yeah, because they're effective. They'll try implementing it and then they'll see, how many people drop off from this process. And if that's more than people who successfully, end up canceling, then they're saving money for themselves. So it's a thing that I've heard, with other UX designers, especially, is, a company will, see this and be like, oh, we should totally go and implement this for ourselves. And it's like, no, I don't want you to. And so, yeah. And so it kind of becomes a little bit hard of having to go up against, your own bosses and being like, and so that's why I tend to push the, like, explaining to them of, like, how this is a known thing, and it erodes trust and makes people dislike your product. So if you're intending to, like, keep going, then you should focus on better patterns to help people, to make it easier for them. It is nice when you can go and pause your membership, or, switch to something that's going to be at, like, a lower payment. There's all sorts of ways to, like, get people to continue using your product, and when they're done, just let them go. All right. We're almost at the end now. So who's in UX? So I want to wrap up this with a quick talk about the various types of careers in UX. We've got designers, researchers, engineers, strategists, and more. UX as we've seen, is intended to address every aspect of an end user's interactions with a company's products and services, which results in a wide array of different roles if you're interested in pursuing it. And I really do hope you're interested in pursuing it. As companies build out their UX teams, a diverse team working towards a similar goal will only help us all make better technology for the future. I also want to emphasize that UX should not be a department separated from the processes involved, and our departments benefit from an interdisciplinary connection. So for example, when you bring engineers into the earlier design stages in order to understand the users, so that way they can understand the user's goals, communication will improve when you're discussing a solution that fits with the designer's ideas, but is kind of butting up against the wall of, like, realistic issues involved with implementing them. If your engineers understands why you're trying to design something this way, they can also work with you. So I strongly encourage that even if you're not convinced that you want to transition out into a career in UX, that you'll continue to learn more about the field of UX and build that dialogue with the other departments in your company. We are all working towards understanding how users shape technology and how the technology we build is shaping our habits and society. It's really important for everyone involved to understand this exchange, or we end up missing important things like biases in AI, again, the misuse of dark patterns, neglecting our users through accessibility, and more. And this has all just been an overview of a few topics that I feel are important to understanding UX and its impact into businesses. There's a lot I couldn't touch on, and a lot that I could really just go on about for hours. So I have this wall of text because I wanted to put up a few resources to help you as you move forward. I'm a big self-learner. I originally took a boot camp for UX, before I got my first job in it. And then even though I got my job, I decided to go to school. So I'm a fan of boot camps, academia, mentorships, reading textbooks and any papers that you can get your hands on, listening to podcasts, however you learn best, you should do it. So I broke this up into a few sections, overviews. So here, the Interaction Design Foundation is a site that puts out a lot of information on the foundation, on UX design, HCI, interaction design, everything and anything in between. And I do highly recommend them. You can get a lot of content from them for free. And they do also have, like, a monthly service where you can pay and sign up for online classes. The Nielsen-Norman Group is a group that has been studying UX for years. And they're where a lot of our foundations come from. So I highly recommend checking them out. More books, special topics here. Stephen Few is someone who's really great at data visualization and dashboard design, and I spend most of my time working in dashboards and data viz. So I highly recommend that if you've ever had any interest in what some consider to be the more boring side of design, but it can be really interesting, I promise. This is a great book for usability, for understanding usability testing, and it can answer a lot of those questions about it. More things, theory and history. I'm a big fan of HCI theory. So here's a few things to go check into. And accessibility. The Ally project is a great resource. Stark is a plugin that was developed for Figma, Sketch, and XD that helps you test out color contrast. But on top of being just a very useful plugin, they have a really great community that talks and focuses on accessibility issues. More dark patterns, and this is a really great talk about making motion inclusive. It was something that I had only recently learned about, of how motion design, video, and all of those things have negative impacts on certain peoples. And so this talk is really an eye opener as you think about all the things that you're putting into your site. And that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I lost those glasses in a river.
No.
Yeah, I went to one of the rivers just south of Dallas. I think it was like an hour or two south. I forgot what it was called. Really great spot, but it will eat your sunglasses.
Oh.
Can you post the slide links, Melissa, in the chat?
The what?
The slide links for your topic.